Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear respected brothers and sisters and elders, those who are in the main hall here and also watching online. Just very briefly, inshallah, I'm going to be covering the prophetic manner of dealing with people, a prophetic manner of counseling. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he had many qualities. He had many roles and responsibilities. He was first and foremost the prophet, the Nabi of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the last of the messengers, He was a husband, he was a father, he was a friend, he was a companion, he was a statesman also. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he performed many roles. He was also a counselor. The way we understand perhaps counseling is slightly different, but he was there to console and comfort the companions during the difficult and the challenges in Mecca and also in Medina until the last breath of An-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Now, the term psychology and counseling is being blasted left, right, center. There's the well-being industry is probably about $2 billion or $5 billion dollar industry per annum. There are books being written, there are courses being delivered, there are people making YouTube videos, and the list is endless. And one of the reasons I see, and my observation is that because in the West, religion, and in the Middle East, for example, I lived in the Middle East for a long time, and in the Muslim countries, is not, psychology, counseling is not really talked about that much, right? It's not talked about that much. But in the West, because religion is not talked about a lot, although we live in a kind of majority Christian country, but it's a secular country. Essentially, it's a secular country. European countries are secular countries, right? America, again, Christianity is really powerful there, but it's still a secular country. So psychology, in one sense, again, a little bit of history, has replaced, for many people, many societies, religion. People before, when they had issues, even in Muslim countries now, when they had issues they wanted to talk about, they wanted advice and counseling, they would go to the imams, they go to the priest. Before in the UK, in Europe, they go to the priest. But post-industrial revolution, that completely changed. The way we live, the way we kind of work completely changed, and things began to compartmentalize. So science replaced religion. Psychology, in a sense, replaced religion. So now people tend to go to, when they want to discuss the issues, spiritual or psychological issues, they go to a therapist, they go to a psychologist. And obviously a lot of these therapists and psychologists, they're not approaching issues and things from a religious, spiritual perspective. They're approaching things from a material, secular perspective, which will give a very different image and picture and framework to the people. That's one of the reasons, I feel, my observation and study is that because people is within us, it's innate within us to want something greater than us, want something, extra. We want to be spiritual. This is built within us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But religion is not taken seriously. Religion is, unfortunately, in most cases, mocked and ridiculed. Religious figures, unfortunately, are mocked and vilified and maligned in the West. So people, they need to quench that thirst for spirituality. They need to quench that thirst for psychology. So they tend to secular Western psychology. And he himself experienced the highs and the lows. I mean, one of the most profound, or the whole Quran is profound. But in Mecca, for example, when the Prophet ﷺ came, when he began his call to Tawheed, we know what happened. He didn't want anything. He didn't want material gains. He didn't want wealth. He didn't want assets. He didn't want to be king. The Quraysh, they said, leave your deen. Leave your call to Tawheed. Leave your Islam. Leave your God, right? We'll make you a king. We'll give you anything you want. Anything in this dunya you want, we will give you. And we know the famous lines the Prophet ﷺ mentioned. If they place the sun on my right hand and the moon on my left hand, I will not give up this message until I continue to accomplish it or I die in that path. Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Before that, before prophethood, he was one of his nickname, if you like, or his attribute was given to him by the Quraysh was Al-Amin, the most trustworthy, the most generous, the most kind, the most gentle. Some of the reports mentioned that if the Quraysh, they would, leave Mecca to go on a holiday, they didn't have NatWest before, they didn't have Rand Bank before, they would leave their possessions with their Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is how, even before prophethood, he was Al-Amin. When they had any disputes, they would come to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When they wanted to put the kiswa over the Kaaba, what happened we know. Right? They began to quarrel, they began to argue which tribe, which clan, which person will have the honor to cover the Kaaba, the first mosque of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this earth. And they chose an-Nabiy sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And there was no quarrel, there was no disputation, there was no argument, there was no hesitation. This is Al-Amin. He was known to be authentic, before prophethood. He was upon the deed of Hanafiya. He did not worship idols, even though his family, his whole entire tribe worship. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected him. And when he began the da'wah, overnight, literally, overnight, from being an Amin, from being the most trustworthy, he became a soothsayer, according to the Quraysh, a magician, a liar, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And what this tells us many things is that, when you are with the crowd, and especially in a crowd where they're not fulfilling the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you want to fit in, you do what they want to do, and they'll call you the most gentle, they will call you the most kind, they will give you all the accolades that you want and your nafs desires. But as soon as you critique the status quo, as soon as you analyze and go against the status quo and say, look, I have a better way. The Prophet ﷺ said, I don't want anything. I don't desire anything. My ajr, my rewards, all of the Prophets said, are with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ya nas qulu la ilaha illallah tuflihu. All people say, la ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, and you will be successful in this dunya and also in the hereafter. He didn't want anything. So as soon as he changed, as soon as he began to give da'wah, they called him, they wanted to kill him, they wanted to assassinate him. Right? Overnight. And this is, unfortunately, look at in some Western countries, Muslims contribute in the society, Muslims are engineers and teachers, they're doing, a lot of good in this country and other countries. Right? But when people critique certain policies or issues, overnight, the Muslims are bad, and Muslims are this, and Muslims are that. And this is the tricks of the shayateen. And that will continue, unfortunately, until their judgment. We have to be resilient, and we have to stick together, be united in the tawheed, the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when he faced those challenges, really harsh words, he was a human being, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He felt pain. So Allah said, وَلَقَدْ نَعْلَمُ أَنَّكَ يَضِيقُ صَدْرُكَ بِمَا يَقُولُونَ فَسَبِّحْ بِحَمْدِ رَبِّكَ وَكُمْ مِنَ السَّاجِدِينَ وَاعْبُدْ رَبَّكَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَكَ الْيَقِينُ. O Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we know that your heart feels pain because of what they say. They're calling you a soothsayer, they're calling you a magician, they're calling you a liar overnight. Yesterday they called him the most trustworthy. They would leave their life possessions with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, because their nafs doesn't like truth, their nafs doesn't like tawheed, nafs doesn't like pure things, because they're accustomed to what? Accustomed to their desire, following their lust and desire. It's like, I always give this example that if you were to eat, a good salad, Turkish salad or Greek salad every single day, right, for about 1-2 months, and you get used to it, you like it. For lunch and dinner, you eat it, and suddenly, after 2 months, someone gives you really bad PFC, right? You probably vomit. You don't like it, right? Because your nafs, your body got accustomed to good food. Whereas someone who's eating bad food all the time, right? But, Burger King or McDonald's or KFC every single day to probably get ill. But suddenly that you give them salad, they may not like it because their nafs or their body is not accustomed to that. So because the Quraysh, then their nafs was accustomed to shirk, accustomed to worshipping idols, accustomed to following the lust and desire. When the Prophet came with milk, pure things, no, they wanted alcohol. They wanted wrong things. Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So overnight they called him a magician. So he felt pain. If I were to call you all sorts of names, you didn't do anything to me. You're giving me water, you're giving me drinks. And suddenly, without any recourse, I called you names. How would you feel? You feel sad, you feel upset. And human beings are like that. Right? Human beings are like that. And the Prophet ﷺ felt that. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is consoling the Prophet ﷺ. وَلَقَدْ نَعْلَمُ أَنَّكَ يَضِيقُ صَدْرُكَ بِمَا يَقُولُونَ. O Prophet Muhammad, we see, we know, we are aware, we observe the pain that you are going through. What should you do? Continue with your mission. Continue in your mission. Right? فَسَبِّ بِحَمْدِ رَبِّكَ وَكُمْ مِنَ السَّاجِدِينَ. Right? Glorify the praise of your Lord, morning and evening. وَعْبُدْ رَبَّكَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَكَ الْيَقِينَ. And worship your Lord until your final last breath in this dunya. So continue with your mission. Difficulties and challenges will come. And the Prophet ﷺ and the Anbiya faced enormous challenges. A couple of months ago we talked about Ayyub alayhi salam and how he went through a lot of challenges and difficulties. The Prophet ﷺ, he went through a lot of challenge and difficulty, but he never lost hope. He never lost hope, and he exuded hope. He exuded hope, and he illuminated hope in the hearts and the minds of the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he had that mission. He didn't want money. He didn't want anything else. That the trials and tribulations are tests from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to elevate him in this dunya and also in the hereafter. Another verse we know, the famous verse, قل إن صلاتي ونسكي ومحياي ومماتي لله رب العالمين لا شريك له وبذلك أمرت وأنا أول المسلمين. Say, O Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and by extension all the Muslims until Yawm al-Qiyamah. Say, have your identity, be clear in your identity, be clear in your belief. If we believe that Islam to be the truth, if we believe Islam to be the haqq, why are we not showing Islam to be the haqq in our actions, in our behavior? If we believe the Prophet ﷺ is haqq, why are we not following in the footsteps of our Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam? قل إن صلاتي ونسكي ومحياي ومماتي لله رب العالمين. Say, O Prophet Muhammad, believe it psychologically, believe it, have firm conviction. Say, my prayers, my living and my dying, my prayers, my nusuk, all the acts, good actions that I do in Hajj and other rituals are all for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I don't want money for that. I don't want wealth. I don't want anything else. I want to seek the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. La sharika lah. There is no one worthy of worship except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He has no partners. I don't do it to seek fame. I don't do it to seek attention. I don't do it to seek the pleasure and to please my family or my people. The only being I seek to please is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. La sharika la. Wa bi dhalika umirtu wa ana awwalul muslimin. That is my life mission. That is the mission that I was sent. That is the mission that you and I sent here. Why are you here? And knowing that trials and tribulations will come, and when you have a purpose, a lot of people, because they feel empty. In the West, many people, they feel empty. They have all the material things. They have all the cars and all the houses, but they feel empty. Why? Because the purpose is not there. The higher purpose is not there. And that purpose is to وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I have not created the mankind and the jinn except that they should worship me. And the Prophet ﷺ, he understood that. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala purified An-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and purified the companions. The companions, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman and Ali and all the great companions, they were pure at heart. They were pure at heart. And they needed to be to disseminate the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Coming back to our topic, that's the kind of prelude to what I'm going to talk about. Few things. People now, as I said, rather than going to imams and scholars or priests who are trained in the Bible or the Quran or divine revelation, they tend to go to therapists who may not necessarily always and a lot of the time do not approach things or issues from a divine perspective, from an Islamic perspective, right? And this is really, really important for us to understand. Why? Remember, as I said, psychology and counseling has replaced religion. When people go to psychologists and those psychologists, they're not informed of their religion, they're not coming from an Islamic perspective, they are offering their clients, they're offering people a way of thinking. They are instilling in the hearts and mind a different aqidah, a different way of thinking, different values. When people talk about different personality traits, these personality traits are alternative spiritualities, alternative way of looking at world, looking at our behavior, looking at well-being. This is really, really important. So when we talk about psychology or mental health, there are 5 or 6 things that we need to bear in mind, right? And how that word and how that concept impacts us individually and as a collective. Psychology talks about how you work. What is happening, right? We human beings, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us, and we operate through feelings and thoughts and in emotions, and beliefs and attitudes, the approaches that we have, assumptions that we form, perceptions that we have. All these things are regulated by a modality in the secular perspective. But Islam also regulates that. Those thoughts and feelings and perceptions, volitions and beliefs and aqidah. Islam, through the Quran and Sunnah, also does that. And it gives a completely different worldview and approach, system way of looking at it. Number 2, knowledge of human functioning, right? When we look at individuals, society, how they operate, how they think, how they move, how they behave, again, how groups behave, how companies behave, our family, within the family ecosystem, how they behave, there are certain ways of looking at it. The secular way is one way, but also the Islamic way, the divine way. We have to try and understand that. And unless we immerse ourselves in the Quran and Sunnah, we will adopt the psychology or I would say, aqidah of Freud, aqidah of Carl Rogers, aqidah of this, aqidah of that. This is aqidah. When you go to certain therapists, I know people who are listening who are trained in the Western psychology and therapy, they may not like this, but I have to say what I feel to be the correct thing, right? Essentially, right, not in completely, but in many parts, they are giving you a different aqidah. They are giving you a different creed. They are giving you a different value system. They're giving you a different belief system. And that, in the short term and long term, impacts our behavior, our thoughts, and then our behavior, and how we relate to each other. Look at the youth, the Muslim youth, how they relate to each other now. Is that according to the Sunnah or according to some other aqidah? So identity, brothers and sisters, is really important. What is lacking, right, is that we don't talk enough about the Muslim identity and the aqidah, the true aqidah that we need to talk about. And as I mentioned, number 3, competing theories of human personality. All the different, I'm going to go through the different madhabs of psychology in a moment. All the different personality theories, right? The competing personality theories are alternative spiritualities, alternative aqidah system, belief systems, alternative value systems, right? And so it's important that we understand what our value system is. What is the Islamic value system? What is the Islamic aqidah, right? And then number 4, practical applications to psychotherapy or therapy. So the practical application, people might assume, okay, well, these are skills. But even the skills, right? Even the words that the therapist may utter or the question that the therapist may say is based on a value system that may or may not be according to the Quran and Sunnah of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And also, popular culture. We look at, movies, Hollywood movies and Bollywood movies, and now YouTube and Netflix and Amazon and pop songs and even football and this is what popular culture is, arts and entertainment. We are bombarded with images of different pop idols, footballers, pop idols, right? And their philosophy and their values. Do you not think that these things will impact our psyche? Definitely it will. It will impact our psyche. So the way the Sahaba and the Prophet ﷺ dealt with psychological issues and spiritual issues is very different, because they didn't have these problems that we have now. And you will see the techniques that the Prophet ﷺ used. The second thing I need to mention before I go into it is you look at all of the different psychologies or psychologists, the founding fathers. Same way we have, as an example, the 4 Imams. There were many more Imams, but the 4 Imams, Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Shafi, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, right? In psychology, they also have founding fathers. In contemporary Western psychology, you have Freud, for example. You have Carl Rogers. You have B.F. Skinner. You have Jung, right? All these different, many different kind of founding fathers, and each of them developed not based on empirical science, because a lot of they don't go by science. In Freud, when Freud came to prominence, or he began to teach his stuff, a lot of the medics and a lot of the scientists, they used to mock him, essentially. They used to vilify him. What is this guy saying? What is he talking about, right? But unfortunately, a lot of his views, right, are in popular culture, in movies, in novels, in stories, right? And if we study it, you'll see how his theories and his views and his values, his aqidah system, his aqidah essentially, his aqidah is pervasive throughout our society, even in children education. This is how deep it is. It's a different aqidah system, right? And there are so many, right? There are so many, but the practical application, the psychotherapy or therapy models, they say there are 300 madhabs. We have 400, but there are 300 madhabs. But you can actually summarize it in 10 of them. One of them, I'll mention one of them, is the psychodynamic or psychoanalytic modality, espoused by Freud and later developed by other scholars. Freud, very briefly, he was a misogynist. He dehumanized women, right? And some reports mention that he used to take cocaine, right? And right? He used to he dabbled in the cult, right? So many, and a lot of his theories is based on seeing the human being in a negative way. That human being is evil, human being is bad, human beings, they're animalistic, right? And if you read his kind of stages of development of children, it's in my opinion it's disgusting. It's not scientific, right? But it's very, very prominent. Even among Muslim therapies, they take this seriously. But it's not scientific, right? It's his thinking, it's our views. But again, providing a different belief system, providing different aqidah system, which we don't necessarily. I'm not saying everything he said is wrong. I'm not saying everything Jung or Carl Rogers or B.F. Skinner or others is wrong. You can say they bring partial truths, but not the complete truth. They bring some goodness, right? So we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. But that even then, the whole system is problematic. The whole aqidah system is problematic, right? And most of the training that therapists are provided is basically essentially tarbiyah. We have in Islam a concept of Islamic tarbiyah, right? Spirituality, the Quran and Hadith and aqidah and fiqh and usul, that molds and shapes. Similarly, those other psychologies and therapeutic models, they shape our thoughts. They shape the way we think, the way we talk, the words that we use. And when those kind of systems shape the way we think, the way we speak, the way we behave, right? And it's based on or predicated upon an Islamic foundation, then obviously you will see problems. You will see many problems, right? And he was very deterministic that past what happened in childhood determines always necessarily determines what happens in the future. And it's not scientific, right? Some people, for example, who faced abuse in childhood, later on they develop into good well-rounded human beings. But some who did face abuse, unfortunately, they do develop they develop problems in their adult life, right? So again, you have to take case by case, but it's not consistent, right? So he was very deterministic, right? Fatalistic, very deterministic, fatalistic, which goes against a basic aqidah, basic principle of aqidah within Islam. So even the question, one thing I need to mention is that counseling or psychotherapy is not problem. Yes, people assume that if you have a problem, you go to a psychotherapist or a counselor. Not necessarily. Sometimes just to speak to another human being is really, really helpful. Right? It's really helpful. Sahaba, they would come to the Prophet ﷺ. Sahaba, they would gather. They said, "Ta'adu nu'minu sa'a." Let us come together and let us revive our iman. Revive our iman. So this is natural. Human being, we are not kind of individualistic. We can't isolate ourselves from society, from people. If people isolate themselves from the family members and the friends for about 2-3 months, they'll develop problems. Because we are insan, we are sociable human beings. We can't be alone. That's why one of the biggest killers in the UK for the elderly is loneliness. Loneliness triggers other problems or exacerbates other medical problems. And this is among the elderly. If you Google it, you'll see the stats, unfortunately. So even the basic question that their therapist may ask, so for example, so tell me what is the problem? All these questions, someone asked, so tell me what is the problem? All of these questions, when did you have this problem? How did you find out about this problem? When did the problem start? All these problems, they're based on a proposition. They're based on a presupposed understanding of that person or human being, already based on a different set of beliefs and aqidah. Already based on different set of beliefs and aqidah. You will see, and I'll give you some example. The Prophet ﷺ did not do this. The Prophet ﷺ did not do this. So even so tell me what is the problem presupposes that there is a problem that must be understood. I'll tell you a basic thing. You're 40. You're 40 years old, 50 years old, and you've experienced life. You worked, you studied, you got children, you got grandchildren. You experienced life. Now something happened for whatever reason. You're feeling sad, you're feeling anxious, you're feeling depressed, and you want to go and speak to someone. And you speak to a therapist who does not know you, has not lived with you, does not know your personality. Within half an hour, 1 hour, they assume that they know your whole life story. Ridiculous. The Prophet did not do this. The Prophet did not go in the past when he counseled the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How do you feel about this problem? Presupposes that the problems cause feelings, that feelings need to be clarified in order to reach a solution. Why do you think you have this problem? Presupposes that the problem has a cause and that finding it will help solve the problem. And even among the kind of secular psychologies and therapeutic approaches, there are differences. Not everyone will agree with this. But because of the popular culture, the way things are being promoted, right? These approaches are very, very popular, even among Muslims, unfortunately, right? So I'm going to mention few principles of counseling the Prophet ﷺ, the way he approached counseling. Few principles, and these are based on research. Research analysis of probably over 5,000 hadith of a Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Analysis, study of over 5,000 authentic hadith. Hadith from Bukhari and Muslim. The hadith from only taken from Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. Researchers analyzed the way he communicated, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the way he spoke to his family members, the way he spoke to people, difficult people, the way he spoke to elderly, where he spoke to the young people, and they analyzed, and they came up with certain principles, right? Number one, really, really important that I mentioned, right? The human behavior is based on what one determines in the future, not in the past. What determines in the present and also in the future. Therefore, the counsellor should not investigate what had happened in the client's past or the factors or motives that triggered the client's behavior problem, right? Which is the basis of many Western modalities. Always look at the past. Look what caused, what triggered it. And now anything triggers anyone, unfortunately. But the Sunnah is the opposite. Sunnah is the opposite. I mean, basic example. Right? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Look at the Battle of Khandaq, for example. Right? 10,000 people, they wanted to come and exterminate the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, exterminate the Muslim. They were aggrieved. The Quran describes the companions like they were choking in a way. They were scared. This is Ali, Umar, Uthman, Abu Bakr. They were scared. You got 10,000. And Medina, the inhabitants of Medina, about 3,000. That's it. You got 10,000 encircling around Medina. They wanted to uproot the Muslims. They wanted to destroy Islam. And we know what happened. I don't need to go into it. To the point that they couldn't, for 1 or 2 months, they couldn't eat anything. Sahaba, they would come and they would eat leaves. They would eat leaves because they didn't have enough food. They didn't have any food. There were children crying. There were men and women, starving. And the Prophet ﷺ had to, tie stones around his blessed stomach, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to quench the hunger. And in that moment, the Prophet ﷺ was not looking at the past. He's not looking at the past. He's looking at the future. And he's giving glad tidings to the companions. He said to the companions, I see you. He's giving them hope. I see you conquering the palaces of Persia. And the companions are saying, Ya Rasulullah, look at our state. Look at our state. How can you think of that? And the Prophet said, no, have belief, have iman, have, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has promised us, Inna Allah la yukhliful mi'ad. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not go back on His promise, giving them hope, looking into the future. And that motivated them. That gave them energy, spiritual energy. That gave them energy, and we know what happened. And when another hadith, when the young man came to the Prophet ﷺ, he said, Ya Rasulullah, idhinni zina. Give me permission to do zina. What did the Prophet say? He didn't rebuke him. He didn't vilify him. Right? He didn't kick him. He said, would you like someone to do that with your mother? He said, no. He came back again. Ya Rasulullah, give me permission to do zina. Would you like someone to do that with your sister? No. Would you like someone to do with your wife, with any of your family member? Right? And the Prophet ﷺ kept on asking this, looking, providing solution. Would you like this? Of course not. And it is said that, zina was the most hated thing for that companion. Radiallahu ta'ala anhu. This was the way of An-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So number one, Prophet would almost, not always, but almost always avoid the why question. Right? Why me, Ya Allah? Why are you giving me all these challenges? Why do you think that is causing the problem? So finding a solution does not necessarily mean that you need to understand the cause always. Right? I'm not saying it's a general rule, but sometimes you do need to, of course. But Allah has given us the reason for our demise, the reason for the problem that we will face in the Quran and the Sunnah of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? Number two principle is to clients who have committed sinful acts or wrongdoings because of the ignorance, the counsellor should explain the rules, laws from the religious aspects. right? So it's important for the Muslim counselor to be aware of fiqh, to be aware of the basic fardul ayn. Not to be a scholar perhaps, but to be aware of the basics, right? The basic example, when the Prophet ﷺ, in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the Bedouin came inside the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ. And the Bedouins, they're not civilized. They would go to the bathroom anywhere, right? They don't understand. They're very different. Their way of life is different from civil kind of society, a cosmopolitan city like Medina. He came, he had to go. And when you have to go, you have to go, right? And he went in the corner of the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ and he urinated. And the companions are saying, what are you doing? And, this is wrong. We know the hadith. And the Prophet ﷺ said, calm down to the companions. Calm down. Bring a bucket of water and pour over it. And he went to the Bedouin and said, this is a place of worship. We prostrate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't urinate. And no one after, because of that incident, no one after, him urinated or done anything like that in the mosque of the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So teaching the aqidah. When the companion came to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, family members passed away, right? Family members passed away. Obviously, they're distraught. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam empathized, and the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, even he cried. And the companion said, Ya Rasulullah, even you know the qadr of Allah. This is the will of Allah. Well, he said, yes, we are pleased with the qadr of Allah, but our eyes still cry. Our eyes still cry. But again, encouraging, commanding, inspiring the companions to look into the future, not look at the past. Right? Dwelling on the past, it can be problematic. Not all the time, but a lot of the time it can be problematic, right? The counselor should not investigate the client's background. Instead, he should focus on the client during the session, right? Investigating the background. Right? What happened is that, and going into the background, there's a skill. The way a lot of counselors are trained to do that, it can be very problematic. But there's a skill to do that without taking the problematic path. So we don't need to go, and you're with the client for 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 50-year person. How can you begin to understand? What you will do, you will project your understanding, your subjective understanding onto the client. And everyone's experiences are subjective, unique to that individual. There are similarities, but unique to that individual. So what tends to happen all the time, they project onto the client their understanding, their perception, their experience, and they assume that the experiences that they had are the same experience that their clients have. That's not the way to go. That's not the way. And a lot of even secular modalities disagree with that, not just from the Islamic perspective, even secular modalities. And finally, the counselor is encouraged to praise the client's good deeds. If you always focus on the negatives, and someone comes, what is the problem? And the client focuses on negative and negative and negative, right? And talks for hours and hours on that, you will magnify the negative. Our psyche, our mind is very creative. We can imagine things, right? And the Prophet ﷺ in the Battle of Khandaq, he is getting the companions to imagine and dream. Imagine and dream about what? They're going to have the keys to the palaces of Persia. And while they're living in mud huts, while the 10,000 army strong, they wanted to kill the companions, kill the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But the Prophet ﷺ is not focusing on the negative, he's focusing on the positive. He's focusing on what might be. What are the solutions? How can we overcome these problems? So when we focus on the solution, we'll magnify the solution. If you always problem talk, we'll problematize it, right? The problem becomes the problem. Yeah, right? The problem becomes the problem. We magnify and emphasize on the problem, we will create more problems. And I've seen it happen. I've seen it with some of my students who follow that modality, that they make the problem even a bigger problem, and they create for the client more problems. Whereas if you focus on the solution, it doesn't mean that we don't listen to their problems, we don't empathize, there's a skill for that. But we don't magnify, even unintentionally, with the questions that we ask, the problems. We find the solution, or we help the client themselves to find solution. Who is best Who is best to know his or her life story? The clients. No matter what, no imam, no scholar, no counselor will know, right? Fully. They can glean from it, but fully they will not know, because you have your own experiences, and your experiences are unique to you, not to anyone else. There are similarities, as I mentioned, but it's unique to you. And so focus on the positive rather than the negative. Not in an excessive way, because sometimes you can be over positive and that can be problematic, right? But in a balanced way. And some of the examples I gave, there are so many other examples. The way the Prophet ﷺ asked the question, the words that he used, right? If we can incorporate those approaches and the questions and the ways and mannerism the Prophet ﷺ counseled the companions, then we will see a different way. We will instill in society a psychology that is based on faith, psychology that is based on divine guidance, a psychology that is based on the sunnah of an-Nabiyyu sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Now there are so many other examples are given, but if you go back to the sunnah and go back to this principle, you will find how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam communicated with the companions, how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam engaged the companions. This was a very brief window in some of the techniques of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, right? You know, there are many modalities out there. There are many modalities, I'm not saying people should not learn. Sometimes you should learn those modalities. You know, I've done my master's degree on them, and I'm doing my PhD on it, right? And the famous line of poetry, right? It says that تعلمت الشر لا لشره ولكن لتوقيه. I studied evil things, not for the sake of, not to follow the evil things, but to protect myself from the evil things. So people need to learn, people need to obviously, but unfortunately what is happening now, there are many Muslims who are just carbon copying those different aqidas and belief systems and using one or two verses here and there and making it Islamic. And it's creating more problems than solutions. It's creating more problems than solutions. So if you go back to the Quran, you go to the Sunnah of Nabi Sallam, you'll see a completely whole different picture when it comes to psychology and counseling, and how therapists or how imams can approach the clients. Thank you for listening. May Allah SWT bless you. May Allah SWT enable us to learn the seerah of Nabi Sallam. May Allah SWT enable us to learn the Quran and the Sunnah of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam.